The detective watched as the monster left the room. The blood loss had started to affect his brain. He slipped into slumber and suddenly woke up. Yet, when he looked around, he could see his corpse in the corner beneath him. On the opposite end of the room, he could hear metal scraping across the wall. The being slammed their weapon into the roof, causing it to cave in, revealing the outside. A small sword with teeth along the tip glinted in the moonlight. A thunderous roar can be heard as the monster comes back to see what caused the commotion. As it ran into the room, the being stabbed the monster in the chest, twisting the blade before removing it. The monster collapsed to the floor, and the being held out its hand to him. He reluctantly took it, and it had a cold, stone-like feeling to it. A fog rolled in after he took its hand and started to surround him. It felt suffocating. Even in death, he felt immense constriction, unable to move or scream, until finally he ended up in the same room. But something was different. There was no moon, but a bright purple hue could be seen across everything. The being was also gone, leaving only a statue in their place. As the detective wandered around his new surroundings, he couldn't help but feel as if he was being watched. Looking around, a plethora of birds with large beaks and bones protruding from their skin could be seen in the distance. Dogs with discolored fur ranging from a sunset orange to a deep crimson red, and mannequins with their faces open wider than normal were dotted all around in the streets, either asleep or still. Large creatures with fur and feathers could be seen in distant homes through the windows. Snakes wrapped around trees and poles everywhere left a slimy trail as they slithered from branch to branch. Freakishly disfigured squid-like creatures could be seen in holes in random walls. The purple glow only enhanced their deformities, making all of their issues more visible. As the fact of his death and the existence of a place after death begins to set in, he could hear the statue behind him begin to crack. The detective froze, unable to decide whether he should flee or stay to fight. Then, the statue burst into many pieces with an explosion of light. The being had returned, raising their sword once more. It then lifted its hand and gestured to the detective to follow. Reluctantly, He agreed and followed it past all the monsters around the new realm. They all seemed to be stuck in a trance, unable to care about anything new in their surroundings. They walked further and further until they reached a wall that seemed to resemble flesh, yet was made out of a dark stone. The being then started to work on making an opening to leave, but after the first strike, the whole realm started to shake. Every monster and creature had felt what was happening and immediately turned to the location of the issue. The purple hue had dulled down, revealing a wall of glowing eyes in the darkness with a cold, dagger-like stare. Before any axe could be made, the being had carved out a hole for the detective, gesturing him to go through. Once he did, an amalgamation of sounds could be heard, followed by running, screeching, and walls crumbling. Every monster had begun to hunt him down, as if escape was never meant to be achieved. The being tried to cut down each monster it could, but was overpowered by the sheer horde that flowed in like a tidal wave. It was thrown around and slammed against any and all surfaces before being ripped apart, limb from limb. Once they finished dealing with it, all attention was refocused onto the detective. Dark skeletal hands and appendages were trying to grab him through the hole, each one desperate to regain the soul that was almost released. The detective was safe until he saw another one of the squid things phase through the wall. He froze at the sight of it. The lack of a lower body, the see-through stomach, the 4 blade-like hands, and the small skull-like head. Small tendrils had grown out from the hole in the bottom of the monster and had grabbed onto the detective. Once it had fully wrapped him, it began to drag him back into the realm he was almost freed from. There he was again, in the hands of a monster, ready to be torn apart. But this time, there would be no blood to lose, no bones to break. No, this time, it would be his very soul that would be broken over and over again. In a place that looked familiar, but was just different enough to not allow anyone but its residents to get comfortable. Once he had been dragged back inside, the hole was shut, and everything began to tear him down. The dogs aimed for where his ribs used to be. Even in death, the pain was immense. Birds started to peck at his face, trying to disfigure him. The snakes had started to bite and constrict his throat, further severing his ability to speak or scream. With each second of this happening, the furred and feathered ones had begun to grow larger, and once everything else had gotten to try their hand at the detective's soul, the mannequins tore in deeper, slowly taking his appearance, with the only difference being the lack of eyes. Once it was all said and done, the tendrils that bound him to this punishment began to drag him again, this time into the stomach of the squid they were attached to. As he went in, the detective began to feel weaker than before, his memories leaving his mind and beginning to fade into the monster. He was being absorbed without a trace of his normal self ever existing. This was the end, with his final case closing on what the cult was hiding. Nothing left for him to reminisce about. He had failed to flee in time, and this was his punishment. Pain, then nothingness.